Slay the Spire from MegaCrit is a great game. Releasing in early access in 2018 and full release in 2019, Slay the Spire is a unique take on RPGs and deck building games. Combined with roguelite characteristics, it gives the game a unique feel unlike any other game. It has been praised as one of the best indie games ever released, and the developers and modders continue to grow the capabilities within the game. However, that being said, no game is perfect. There are flaws in every single game, and Slay the Spire is no different. While still an amazing indie game, there are some things that could be done a bit better. This isn't criticism on the game at all, just more insight or a potential path of betterment that any project could have. I'm also not a game designer, so take my word with a huge grain of salt. With that said, here are 5 great things and 5 not so great things with Slay the Spire. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe the video. It helps me out a great deal and means the world to me. I'm also on Twitch at twitch.tv/Jonusfatson, or if you want to find out where else I'm available, just hit up Jonusfatson.com. The character deck designs in Slay the Spire are amazing, and this is the core of the game, and it does it really well. There are enough cards to feel that there is a lot of variety without feeling overwhelmed on choices. At the same point, there are not too few cards to feel there isn't enough option when building your deck. Pair that with cards that are designed to work with each other, and you truly feel you are in control of your destiny. So many cards are designed to work together, it feels really great when you play a combo that just destroys. You really feel like you're in total control when you get these synergies, a hard thing to do in a card-based game. The 4 main characters each are designed to have a different playstyle that is unique to each character, and it works really well. Think how different colors in Magic the Gathering play differently than each other, but in a simpler way. Characters can be offense, defense, or DOT focused, and it really shines when you get the appropriate artifacts to support each role. Along with those cards are those artifacts I just mentioned, or trinkets as they're sometimes called, that change the way your deck, you, or your enemies play. They can drastically change the game for both the better and the worse, and the mechanic works really well in giving a fresh feel to your character. There is no story in Slay the Spire. Why are we ascending the Spire? Are we playing as the good guy or the bad guy? Who are any of these creatures? I don't actually feel that every game needs a story, but in a mechanical game like Slay the Spire, it adds another level of immersion to the playthrough. And there is so much in Slay the Spire that is left unanswered. It almost feels like the developers have a story in the game, but forgot to put it in. It's a no-brainer to include this, even if it's minor lore. I'm not asking for a level of story like the Pokemon trading card game on the Game Boy. I really don't need a full RPG from Slay the Spire. I just want enough to understand the universe that Slay the Spire exists in. The game is incredibly balanced and the core mechanics work really, really well. I'm a big fan of turn-based combat. It's probably my favorite RPG mechanic that exists, and Slay the Spire is purely a turn-based game. You might be thinking, of course, it's a card game, but at its core it's not a card game. It's an RPG roguelite that uses cards for actions. This means that the enemies don't play their own cards, and rather show their intent as an indicator above their avatar. Different intents have different symbols, and enemies can do more than one action in a turn, aka debuff you and attack. This back and forth combat works incredibly well, and very rarely do you feel overwhelmed by what the enemy is doing. This means that you can focus purely on your own actions, and pairing this with the myriad of cards and combinations, you really feel you are slaying the Spire. There could be a few more card types in Slay the Spire. On a mechanical level, I feel there are a few components missing. There are a minimal amount of debuffs you can impose on the enemy, and the enemy can impose on you. I get that part of the gameplay of Slay the Spire is to have a minimal deck and to build a deck with a few cards that work really well together, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it feels there's a bit of variety missing. As examples, trap cards that only activate when an enemy attacks you, creature cards that summon your own mob to fight with you, and so forth. These additional card types would add a lot of customization to how each player plays. As well, additional debuffs would be very nice. For any RPG player, they know that debuffs are essential to gameplay. Confusion, Charm, Death Counter are some examples from other franchises. Toad or Chicken would be a really fun status effect as well. Overall, the cards are very well written and dynamic, but I'd like to see more. The flow of traversing an act is really enjoyable. Progression in Slay the Spire is done by having the player traverse up a multi-pathed map with enemies, elite mobs, treasure chests, random events, shops, and so forth. The player chooses one of the few starting points, and each path can cross over with another periodically. There are 3 main acts, and each act has its own map. If the player is good enough, they will see 3 separate maps in a single playthrough. The genius of this design is that it feels linear and open at the same time. This is where it shines. Starting in a path that forks later on means that you can make decisions on your health, money, and other things that carry over from fight to fight. This really gives the gameplay a feel of progression through each act, and it makes you feel the directions you choose impact the gameplay in a meaningful way. The game wouldn't work if it was just fight after fight with no decisions from the player, and this is a great design choice. There's really only one energy type to all the types of cards. This may be my biggest gripe of the game, and I've seen a few other games fall into this as well. There is essentially no mana type on any card, even though the card appears to show different mana types. I get why they've done this. It's much easier for the player to manage one mana pool over 4, but it just feels like every card becomes colorless this way. Cards lose a little bit of their uniqueness, or so it feels. The ironclad playing the silence cards shouldn't be as easy as it is. And there's a few ways to do this in a way that doesn't feel needlessly complex, because after all, Slay the Spire is more of an RPG than a card game, and having Pokemon's or Magic the Gathering's mana system just wouldn't work. One way would be to have a proper colorless mana type and supplement it with specific ones, and allow the player to do it on a whim. Having a trade-up system for mana would really make the player think about playing off-class cards more, and would add a sense of ownership to the class's cards. Man, does this hold its own against other deck building games. It's impossible to have a card game today without comparing it to the behemoth that is Magic the Gathering. Countless card games have died on the vine because they don't get the mechanics right, or the verbiage on the cards were unclear, or the artwork just wasn't enthralling enough. This all comes back to nearly perfect design of Magic the Gathering. Everything is compared to that standard. But here's the thing, Slay the Spire doesn't directly compete with Magic. As mentioned before, it's not a traditional card game, but it does still hold its own. The cards are incredibly well written. The artwork is matched very well to each character's theme, and at a glance, you can easily understand the intent and combinations available to you. This is something that a lot of card games struggle with, and Slay the Spire does a great job. The cards are so well designed, in fact, that a multiplayer version of the game almost seems like a no-brainer. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Not having PvP seems like such an obvious miss. There is no way they either aren't working on it or haven't reviewed it already. The game feels built for PvP. Not to say it wouldn't be challenging to get the balance right, there are some synergies that would be absolutely broken in PvP. I just feel it would be really fun to PvP someone in a mode that felt fair. One way would be to have a modified spire, each player ascending a level, and then they combat each other. It would be a way to retain the feel of Slay the Spire, and it adds an aspect that would be a way to gain skills in the game in another way. Plus, I'd really like to see how some of these cards would work against an opponent that isn't just a dumb AI. One caveat, I do think some of the other suggestions would need to be implemented before this method would be enjoyable, as some of those cards that I mentioned would make that first turn absolutely unfair. This game has a very unique roguelite design. Ever since Spelunky, FTL, and Isaac took over the roguelite scene, they rightfully set the bar for what to expect from a roguelite. Random generation wasn't good enough, and procedural generation became the norm. Slay the Spire has a very clever engine that generates every run. I have yet to run across something that has felt entirely unfair or insurmountable, be that cards, enemies, paths, or anything. With a wide variety of enemies and bosses and an infinite amount of pathways, plus a very cool way to balance just restarting your runs to try to get the best start you can get every time you start a run, you truly feel it's you against the Spire. Pair all this with an Ascension mode that changes the game drastically with every bit of progression you make, and you'll be coming back to Slay the Spire for a long time. I'll be honest, bosses in Slay the Spire have some cool mechanics that only certain bosses have, but overall they feel like glorified mobs. The fight plays out much like any other fight, other than the boss having more health, does more damage, or may have a couple different phases. While I get why this is the case, it makes the boss fight a bit routine. They feel more like a skill check and less like a proper boss fight. There also is a fairly small number of bosses, each floor consisting of 3 options and 1 final boss. This is also the case for elite mobs. There are only a select few of them, and you even see duplicates on the same floor periodically. I'd like to see a couple things: more boss types, more elite types, and different mechanics for the boss fights. It would be cool to see maybe bosses playing cards like players, or debuffs that only certain bosses can cast. I really like how the mechanic of the Time Mage boss works, and I'd like to see more of it. As an example, you can see some mods that play with different mechanic features for bosses and for mobs, and they work really well. I'm always a bit hesitant to play with mods, as I do feel that the game designers will know their game better than anyone, but I can't deny some of the genius that exists on the workshop. All in all, adding in more and different bosses and elites would make the runs feel even more challenging and more unique between them. So there we are. Again, I really love Slay the Spire. This list was not made out of malice, but out of love. I want Megacrit to continue their development of the game, and I really can't wait to find out what future projects they have in store. Great work, Megacrit. Be proud. If you did like the video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It means the world to me. If you also want to find out where else I am available, I am at twitch.tv/Jonusfatson, or if you want to hit up jonusfatson.com for links to all the things. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace out.